have been before, welcome back. For those that might be new, I like to give a little bit of a spiel about it. I try and do something a little different with each concert that we do, have a little bit of a theme or something, and so the fact that we sort of call this one the Big Band Show focuses a lot specifically on really the big bands and the way that they have continued to evolve over the years. So, you know, we'll have some tunes in the program that, of course, harken back to the golden age of the swing bands back in the swing eras, the 30s and 40s and all. But then we'll also look at how a lot of real visionaries continued to reinvent the big band and are continuing into today to come up with new and cool things, ways of keeping the big band tradition alive and well. So the first number that we're going to play for you this evening is it's based on a very famous Spanish tune called Malagueña, and it's the version that was arranged by performance for the Stan Kenton Orchestra. And Stan Kenton was one of those visionaries that, at a time perhaps when a lot of people were thinking that big band had sort of run its course and all that, he sort of came along to kind of show the new way of things, that there's all kinds of interesting things that you could continue to do with big band, as we went into the second half of the 20th century and all. So this is a really fun number. I sort of asked the students how they wanted to start the show and all that, and they decided they wanted to come on out and hit you like a freight train here, and especially the trumpets here. You really get things going in a big way here. So hope you enjoy it. We're going to move to a tune that's more of a straightforward blues tune. And I have to admit, I have a weakness for charts with interesting names. So if it has a strange name to it, I'm usually immediately drawn to it. So Chunkalunka, great, you know. But really the real reason why I picked it, I'll admit, I looked first because of the name. But once I looked at the chart, and I was really happy to see that it's a chart by a really fabulous woman pianist and composer from the history of jazz, Mary Lou Williams, who I really think that, well, I know for a fact that if she had been born later, you know, in the late 20th century or in our own time, she would be a tremendously celebrated figure. She was a real visionary, an amazing composer and arranger, and really did tremendous things within the confines and, you know, what was the usual lot for a lot of women back then, and especially in jazz, which tended to be so dominated by men. So I'm really happy to do a chart by her because, you know, just sort of get her name out there. You know, go on the internet, check her out. She's a fantastic performer and composer. So this tune will primarily feature Ty on the keyboard there. You know, Mary Lou Williams was a pianist, and so you know, naturally the piano was kind of the anchor for a lot of her things, and also be some solos from a couple other members of the group. So hope you enjoy Chunkalunka. turn us to a bit of a Latin American influence, and I always like to like to have some of that in every jazz concert. In fact, the first concert that we do every year is always one that is dedicated solely to Latin jazz, which we've affectionately called Latin Boot Camp, because we really put them through all the different styles, and it really is to emphasize the fact that from the beginning, those rhythms and those sounds from the Caribbean and Latin America were always there. You know, you go back and listen to some of the earliest people on record about jazz, people like Jelly Roll Morton in New Orleans, and they say that was in the air there as much as anything. And so, as you go through the history of jazz, you continually see the way that these rhythms and styles come into jazz. Of course, there was the big bossa nova thing, right, with Girl from Ipanema and all that. And there have been many other influences. And even if we look at later on into rock music and all that, of course, in the 60s and all, with Santana and other people like that, there's always, I think, American music is constantly being refreshed, and we have this, we'll forget about it for a little bit, and all of a sudden it's like, oh man, isn't this cool again? And it's like a rediscovery, a constant rediscovery of incredible rhythms and styles. And so, so this is a fun tune called Bolivian Fans. All right, the next number on our program is, if you're a jazz fan, it's certainly a tune you're probably familiar with. It's a tune written by the jazz legend, the tenor saxophonist John Coltrane, a tune called Giant Steps. And the reason for the name Giant Steps is it really has to do with the way that the harmonies move from one to another. Without getting into overly too much music theory, the usual way that the chords move tend to be related more in fourths and fifths, and those moves make it relatively easy to go from key to key and move smoothly between the changes. In this chart, he decides to move by thirds. And again, without too much theoretical background, most third-related chords are not very easy to transition between when you're soloing. So you pretty much got to keep dumping the notes you were using and putting in new ones, and it makes it very tricky. And so this chart is, very, incredibly respected among jazz players, and constantly rated as probably one of the most difficult tunes, certainly in the top 5 there of the jazz repertoire. So, of course, what do I say? Hey, let's play it. And because I like to challenge this group, and I do definitely tip the hat to those that have bravely undertaken solos in here. It is no easy thing, and. But again, it's kind of like one of those, you got to overcome your fear, right? And so I was sort of like, well, think about it. If you do it, then you kind of say, well, I survived it. You put that check in the box, and you can keep working on it the rest of your life and getting better at it. The thing is to give it a try. And so it's a great tune, a fun tune, and in a strange fit of coincidence or whatever, I learned that last night. The pianist who was probably most synonymous with John Coltrane's group, McCoy Tyner, he died last night, and at the ripe old age of 81. And even though he didn't play on this tune when it was recorded, I figured we should put this one out there to McCoy Tyner tonight, and just as fate would have it, our pianist there, his name is Ty. Is it coincidence? I asked someone before the band, said, yeah, it's totally coincidence. Don't read too much into it. But, so Ty will be McCoy Tyner substitute tonight. All right. All right, so enjoy Giants. gears here a little bit. We got to give a chance for everyone's blood oxygen levels to return to normal. And, do a little ballad here. This piece is probably one of my very favorite ballads in the history of jazz, and this takes us back to the golden age of the big band era, and it was composed by Billy Strayhorn, who was the the right-hand man to Duke Ellington and his big band, and the chances are, if you're familiar with some of Duke Ellington's biggest charts, things like Take the A Train and all, people always say, "Oh yeah, that's Duke Ellington wrote that," and it's true, he did. But Billy Strayhorn was, of course, an integral part, at least 50-50, if not at times more, in certain ways. He's very much the guy that helped give shape to Duke Ellington's vision, I think. And so, a wonderful, wonderful songwriter and arranger, and this is just, again, one of my favorite ballads, a beautiful piece called Chelsea Bridge. next chart is by a band leader and composer, Gordon Goodwin, who is very much active right now. I would say he's probably one of the most sought after and influential big band arrangers of our time. And so he's definitely one of those that is making sure that big band music is alive and healthy and going strong here into the 21st century. And we always like to include a little bit of funk in our concert, of course. I mean, taking us there, towards into the realm of jazz, which is called jazz fusion and all that, incorporating some elements of rock and all of that in there. And this chart, when you hear it, you're definitely going to get this 1970s throwback thing going here. And in case you're wondering what the TOP stands for, it's a little group called Tower of Power that was very popular back in the 70s there. So hope you enjoy TOP Adjacent. switch gears a little bit again and do something a little bit in a more straight ahead swing style. And this tune, again, if you're into jazz, you may have originally heard it associated with Miles Davis. But the actual composer of the tune is Dave Brubeck, who is, of course, a very famous composer and band leader in his own right. Probably most famous for, if you've heard the tune Take 5. And the album that came from was a very influential album showing, most jazz up to that time had been just with 4 beats to the measure, and he was showing that you could still swing and do cool things with in meters other than the normal. And so this tune, however, is in 4, but perhaps it's appropriate that we put it where he did, because as you'll find out in just a moment, the last number that we're going to do deals with some unusual meters in it. So it's kind of the spirit of Dave Brubeck preparing us for that last number. So, but this is a really beautiful tune. Hope you enjoy in your own sweet way. to thank you all for coming out and let you know about some further opportunities to come see us. On April 26th, up in Dahlonega, we're going to be participating in what's called the Collage Concert. We've been doing it for a couple of years now, and it's a show that features all of the musical ensembles. So we'll have the chorus and the symphonic band and our string orchestra. Everyone will be there. So obviously, everyone only gets to play for a limited amount of time, but it's a nice, if you want to get a nice variety show and a sampling of what all we're doing, I invite you to that. Then 2 days later, on the 28th, we will be performing our final concert of the year, our spring concert, and that's always a fun thing. The culmination of the whole year. It's always interesting for me. I'm the only person, aside from those that are in the group here, who, we know how we sounded on the first day of the year and where we are now. And of course, when I say that, a lot of people say, "Oh God, the first rehearsal must be terrible," or something. And that's not the case. But what's interesting is that every group of musicians obviously is a unique blending. Every group has a unique chemistry, and so what's always interesting for me is to kind of watch these unique mixtures every year develop their own sound, how they come together and create their own unique way of doing it. So, a lot of the time I sort of just consider myself like I'm sort of trying to steer that to see, what are they trying to do? How's that sound coming together and make it work for them? And so it's always a real thrill and, to come to the end of the year and to just sort of see what the group has become. Always extremely proud of all the hard work they put in. I push them hard. These charts are not easy. I like to make them come out of their comfort zone, give them something a little bit different to do, and they never disappoint. They always stick to it and put in the work and dedicate themselves to the task. And so it's I hope you have enjoyed what they've been putting out here, and I'm certainly always proud to have them on the stage. And so our last number, as I mentioned, is a little bit of an unusual one. Certainly it's the quirkiest number, I think, on the program. And it's by a guy named Jeff Coffin, who has a sort of a small ensemble group. And he obviously loves doing things in unusual time signatures. A couple years back, I first discovered a piece of his called The Mad Hatter Rides Again, and it was every bit as crazy as you might think. And so I said, well, it's time. It's been a couple years. It's time to do another one. So we have this last tune called Bubble Up, which, and he likes to blend a lot of popular things. So Mad Hatter and this one are both very much tied to funk once again, but instead of being your usual, funk is always a nice solid 4/4. This one incorporates some elements of 7 and some other things. So if you feel like getting up and dancing, feel free. Once again, thank you so much for coming out, and hope you enjoyed Bubble Up.